The banker's men were nailing the foreclosure notice to her door when Mara Whitlock realized she had 3 hours to save her children from the winter that would kill them. Her husband was 6 months dead, the frost had already claimed the garden, and Silas Crown, the man who smiled at her across the church every Sunday, had just stolen everything she owned with a signature on papers she'd never seen. But Mara wasn't the kind of woman who begged. She was the kind who remembered every word her father taught her about survival. And as she watched her daughter's breath fog in the morning air, she made a decision that would turn a cave in the mountains into a battleground and a lie into a war. Welcome to a story of defiance, survival, and the kind of justice that doesn't wait for courtrooms. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. Now hit that like button and settle in, because what Mara Whitlock did next would shake an entire territory to its bones. The sound of the hammer hitting the nail was the same sound that had built this house. 3 strikes, clean and sure, the way Jacob used to do it. But Jacob was gone, and the man swinging the hammer now wore a deputy's badge and wouldn't meet her eyes. Mara stood in the doorway with her shawl pulled tight, watching Deputy Earl Hutchins pin the yellow paper to the wood her husband had planed smooth with his own hands. Behind her, she could hear Lila trying to keep Ben quiet, trying to keep him from seeing, but the boy had his father's curiosity and his mother's stubbornness. "Mama?" Ben's voice was small. "What's that man doing?" Mara didn't answer. She was reading the notice, her lips moving slightly as she parsed the legal language that dressed up theft in respectable clothes. Failure to satisfy debt obligations, pursuant to territorial statute. Seizure of property effective immediately. Mrs. Whitlock. Hutchins stepped back, tucking the hammer into his belt. He was young, maybe 25, and the shame on his face told her he knew exactly what he was doing. "I'm sorry, I truly am, but Mr. Crown has the papers, and the law says my husband owed him money." Mara's voice was flat, controlled. "How much?" $800. The number hit her like a physical blow. $800. Jacob had never borrowed a cent in his life. He'd built this homestead with his bare hands, proved up the claim fair and square, and died breaking his back to make it produce enough to feed his family through the winter. "That's a lie," she said quietly. Hutchins looked away. "I got the promissory note right here, signed and witnessed. Mr. Crown says your husband took a loan 2 years back to buy seed and equipment after the drought." "Show me." He hesitated, then pulled a folded paper from his coat. Mara took it with hands that didn't shake, though everything inside her was trembling. She'd seen Jacob's signature on their marriage certificate, on the land deed, on letters to his mother back east. She knew the way he formed his letters, the slight hook on the capital J, the way his hand cramped when he wrote too long and the letters got smaller. The signature on this paper looked like Jacob's, but it wasn't. "This is forged," she said, looking up at Hutchins. "My husband never signed this." "Ma'am, I can't—" "Look at it." She thrust the paper at him, her finger jabbing at the signature. "Really look. The J is wrong. The tail's too long. And Jacob always dated things with the month spelled out, never numbers. This says 9/14th. He would have written September 14th. Hutchins glanced at the paper, then away. "I'm not a handwriting expert, Mrs. Whitlock. And even if you're right, that's something for a court to decide. Right now, I got my orders." "Your orders?" Mara's voice went cold. "From Silas Crown. From the territorial court acting on Mr. Crown's petition." But his eyes flickered, and she knew she'd hit the truth. "You got until sundown to gather your things. After that, this property belongs to the bank." Sundown. Mara looked west where the November sun was already beginning its slide toward the mountains. 4 hours, maybe 5. "And where exactly do you suggest I take 2 children with winter coming on?" Hutchins shifted his weight, uncomfortable. "There's the church. Reverend Michaels runs a charitable—" "The reverend who takes his salary from Silas Crown's donations?" Mara shook her head. "No thank you, Deputy. We'll manage." She turned to go inside, but Hutchins caught her arm. His grip was gentle, and when she looked back, his young face was twisted with something that might have been guilt or might have been fear. "There's a cave," he said quietly. "Up on the north ridge, about 3 miles into the pine country.
Old mining claim, never proved out. It's got a spring nearby, and the opening faces south so it catches sun. It ain't much, but he glanced over his shoulder, checking to see if anyone was watching. Crown can't claim what he can't find, and that ridge is rough country. Nobody goes up there except the trappers, and they keep to themselves. Mara studied his face. Why are you telling me this? Because I knew Jacob. Hutchins released her arm. He was a good man, and this whole thing stinks. I got a job to do, but I ain't required to like it. He touched his hat brim. Sundown, ma'am. I'm sorry. He walked to his horse and mounted up, riding away without looking back. Mara stood on the porch for a long moment, the forged promissory note crumpling in her fist. Then she went inside and closed the door. Lila and Ben were huddled together on the bed, their faces pale.
At 12, Lila was already learning to read situations the way other girls read books, and she'd understood everything that just happened. Ben, at 7, just knew that something bad was coming. Mama, he whispered, do we have to leave? Mara sat down between them and pulled them close. Yes, baby, we do. Where will we go? Lila's voice was steady, but her hand found Mara's and squeezed tight. Somewhere safe. Mara kissed the top of her daughter's head, breathing in the scent of her hair, soap and wood smoke and childhood. But first we need to pack, and I need you both to be very brave and very smart. Can you do that? They nodded, and Mara felt something hard and fierce settle in her chest. She'd been Jacob's wife for 13 years. She'd buried 2 babies who didn't make it past their first winter. She'd survived drought and flood, sickness and hunger, and the kind of loneliness that came with living 20 miles from the nearest neighbor. She'd learned to shoot, to trap, to preserve meat and cure leather and read weather in the clouds. And she'd learned that when men like Silas Crown decided to take what wasn't theirs, the law wouldn't save you. You had to save yourself. Lila, I need you to start with the food, everything in the pantry that won't spoil, flour, salt, beans, the dried venison. Pack it in flour sacks tight as you can. Ben, you help her. I'm going to get our winter clothes and blankets. They scattered to their tasks, and Mara began to plan. 3 miles north into rough country with 2 children meant they couldn't carry everything. She had to choose what would keep them alive. Clothes first, they could layer everything they owned if they had to. Blankets and furs, the iron cookpot and her father's hunting knife. Matches wrapped in oilcloth. The rifle and all the ammunition they had left. She moved through the house like a general preparing for siege, her mind cataloging and calculating. The furniture would stay. They couldn't carry it, and it wouldn't matter where they were going. The nice dishes her mother had given her, the quilt frame, Jacob's tools, all of it would fall into Crown's hands, and the thought made her want to smash everything herself rather than let him have it. But that was pride talking, and pride wouldn't keep her children warm. Mama, look! Lila held up a small wooden box. Inside were the few precious things they owned, Mara's wedding ring, the silver locket that had belonged to Jacob's grandmother, 3 gold dollars wrapped in paper. Should I bring this? Yes. Mara took the box and tucked it into her coat. And Lila, there's something else I need you to get. In the cellar, behind the potato bins, there's a loose stone. Behind it is a leather pouch. Bring it to me, but don't look inside. Understand? Lila's eyes went wide, but she nodded and hurried to the cellar door. Mara continued packing, layering clothing onto both children until they looked like small, bundled versions of themselves. When Lila returned with the pouch, Mara added it to her own pack without opening it. Inside were the papers Jacob had kept safe. Their marriage certificate, the land deed, letters from his family. Things that proved who they were and what they owned, even if the law chose not to see it. By the time the sun reached its apex, they were ready. 3 packs loaded with everything that mattered, the rifle slung across Mara's back, and 2 children dressed in so many layers they could barely move. Mara took one last look around the house that had been her whole world for 7 years. The table where she'd fed her family. The bed where she'd loved her husband and birthed her babies. The window where she'd stood 1,000 times, watching for Jacob to come home from the fields. All of it would belong to someone else by tomorrow, and there was nothing she could do about it except survive. Come on, she said, holding out her hands. We've got a walk ahead of us. They stepped outside into the cold November air. The sun was bright but thin, offering light without warmth, and the wind coming down from the mountains carried the promise of snow. Mara locked the door, a pointless gesture, but one that gave her a moment of control, and then they started walking. The path north was barely a path at all, just a game trail that wound up through the scrub oak and into the pine forest. Mara set a steady pace, not too fast for the children, but fast enough to cover ground while the light lasted. Ben struggled with his pack after the first mile, and Mara redistributed the weight, carrying more herself and letting Lila take some of Ben's load. "How much farther?" Ben asked, his breath coming in small puffs. 2 more miles, Mara said. "You're doing good, baby. Keep going." The forest grew denser as they climbed, the pines closing in overhead and blocking out the sky. It was colder here, away from the open valley, and Mara could see frost forming on the rocks where the sun didn't reach. She thought about what they were walking toward, a cave that might be nothing more than a hole in the ground, in country so rough that even the trappers avoided it. But it was away from Silas Crown, and right now, that was all that mattered. They found the cave just as the sun began to touch the western peaks. It was exactly where Hutchins had said it would be, a dark opening in the limestone face of the ridge, about 10 feet high and twice as wide. The approach was steep and rocky, but there was a clear area in front where the ground leveled out, and Mara could see the remains of an old fire ring. "Stay here," she told the children, dropping her pack. She pulled the rifle around and checked the load, then approached the cave slowly. The opening was bigger than it looked from a distance, and once her eyes adjusted to the darkness, she could see that the cave went back at least 30 feet before the ceiling sloped down to meet the floor. The walls were dry, the floor was mostly level rock, and when she held up her hand, she could feel a faint current of air moving through, which meant there was ventilation somewhere deeper in. It wasn't a house. It wasn't even close to a house. But it was shelter, and it was theirs, and Silas Crown would never find them here. She walked back to where Lila and Ben were waiting. "Come on, let's get inside before dark." They hauled their packs into the cave, and Mara immediately started organizing. The back of the cave would be their sleeping area, farthest from the wind. The middle section would be for storage and cooking. The front would be where they built the fire, close enough to the opening for the smoke to escape, but far enough in to trap the heat. Lila gathered kindling. "Dry wood only, nothing green. Ben, you help me clear rocks from the sleeping area. We need it as flat as possible." They worked until the light was almost gone, and by the time Mara got the fire started, the temperature had dropped enough that their breath was visible. She heated beans and venison in the iron pot, and they ate in silence, huddled close to the flames. "Mama," Ben said finally, "is this where we live now?" Mara looked around the cave, at the rough stone walls, the smoke-stained ceiling, the cold that crept in despite the fire. Then she looked at her son's face, open and trusting, waiting for her to make sense of a world that had suddenly turned upside down. "For now," she said, "until we figure out something better." "I don't like it here," Ben whispered. "I want to go home." "I know, baby." Mara pulled him close, feeling Lila press against her other side. "But home isn't always a place. Sometimes it's just the people you love. And as long as we're together, we're home. Understand?" Ben nodded against her shoulder, and Lila's arm came around both of them. They sat like that for a long time, 3 people who'd lost everything except each other, watching the fire burn down to coals while the wind howled outside, and the first snow of winter began to fall. The next morning, Mara woke to find 2 inches of snow on the ground and ice forming in the water bucket. She rebuilt the fire with numb fingers, then stood at the cave entrance and surveyed what would have to become their home. The site had potential, she realized. The cave itself provided basic shelter, but it was open to the elements and would be impossible to heat once the real cold arrived. She'd need to build a wall across the opening, leaving space for a door and a proper chimney. She'd need to dig a fire pit with stones to hold heat. She'd need to find clay to seal the gaps, moss for insulation, and enough wood to last through a Wyoming winter. She'd need tools she didn't have, skills she'd barely learned, and time she wasn't sure they could spare. But she'd figure it out. She had to. She was standing there, mentally cataloging what they'd need, when she heard the unmistakable sound of a rifle being cocked behind her. "You picked a hell of a place to squat," a man's voice said. "This is my range." Mara turned slowly, her hands visible, and found herself looking at the most frightening man she'd ever seen. He was tall and lean, dressed in buckskin and furs, with a rifle pointed steadily at her chest. But it wasn't the gun that made her breath catch. It was his face. The left side was a mass of scar tissue, the skin puckered and twisted from some old burn. His eye on that side was milky white, and the scarring continued down his neck and disappeared under his shirt collar. "I'm not squatting," Mara said, keeping her voice level. "I'm surviving. There's a difference." The man's good eye narrowed. "Surviving on my trap line. I could shoot you for poaching and nobody'd say a word." "Then shoot." Mara stepped forward and saw surprise flicker across his ruined face. "But know that you'll be murdering a widow and 2 children who've got nowhere else to go. If that sits easy on your conscience, then pull the trigger." They stared at each other for a long moment. Then the man lowered the rifle, though he didn't uncork it. "Widow Whitlock," he said. "Heard about Jacob. Heard about the foreclosure, too. Crown's got a long reach. You know who I am? I know everybody's business. It's how you stay alive out here." He glanced past her at the cave. "Those your kids?" Mara turned and saw Lila and Ben huddled in the entrance, their faces pale. "Yes." The man studied them for a moment, then looked back at Mara. His scarred face was unreadable, but something in his posture had shifted from threat to assessment. "Name's Caleb Rourke," he said. "And if you're planning to winter here, you're going to die. This cave won't hold heat worth a damn. You've got no chimney, and the first real snow will trap you inside for days. You got maybe 2 weeks before the passes close, and then you're stuck with whatever you manage to scrape together." "Then I'd better work fast," Mara said. Rourke made a sound that might have been a laugh. "You got tools? Building experience? Any idea how to construct a wall that won't collapse in the first wind?" "I'll learn." "You'll freeze." He lowered the hammer on the rifle and slung it over his shoulder. "But I'll give you this. You've got spine. Most women would have broken down crying by now." "Crying won't build a wall," Mara said flatly. "Now, if you're done threatening us, I've got work to do." She turned and walked back to the cave, her heart pounding but her steps steady. Behind her, she heard Rourke say something under his breath, and then the sound of his boots crunching through the snow as he walked away. Lila and Ben rushed to her side. "Mama, who was that?" Ben whispered. "Nobody," Mara said. "Just a trapper who thinks he owns the mountain." She knelt down and looked her children in the eyes. "Listen to me. We're going to be fine." "I don't care what he says. We're going to make this work. Understand?" They nodded, but she could see the fear in their faces. And truthfully, she felt it too. Because Caleb Rourke was right about one thing. They were running out of time, and winter didn't care about determination or grit. Winter just came, and it killed whatever wasn't strong enough to survive it. But Mara Whitlock hadn't come this far to give up now. And if she had to learn how to build a house from raw stone and pine logs with winter breathing down her neck, then that's exactly what she'd do, even if it killed her. 3 days passed before Caleb Rourke came back. Mara had spent those days in constant motion, driven by a fear she wouldn't let herself name. She'd cut pine branches to create a crude windbreak across the cave entrance, layered rocks to build up the fire pit, and started mapping out where the wall would need to go. Her hands were raw and bleeding. Her back screamed with every movement. And at night she collapsed beside her children, too exhausted to do anything but sleep. But the work wasn't enough. Every time she looked at what she'd accomplished, she saw how far she still had to go. The windbreak was already sagging under the weight of the snow that fell each night. The fire pit smoked badly because she didn't know how to angle the stones properly. And the wall she'd envisioned, the one that would seal them safely inside, remained nothing but rocks scattered on the ground and hope that was slowly dying. She was trying to lift a log into place, her shoulders shaking with effort, when she heard footsteps behind her. "You're doing it wrong," Rourke said. Mara didn't turn around. "Then leave." "That log's green. It'll warp when it dries and leave gaps big enough to let the cold through." He walked around to face her, and in the morning light his scars looked even worse. "You need seasoned wood, dead pine, at least a year old, and you need to notch the ends so they lock together." "I don't have seasoned wood. I have what I can drag here myself." Rourke studied her for a moment, his good eye taking in her torn hands, the exhaustion in her face, the desperate set of her jaw. Then he sighed and set down the canvas pack he'd been carrying. "Move," he said. "What?" "Move. You're about to waste half a day on something that won't work." He pulled out a hatchet and a small saw. "I'll show you how to do it right. Once. After that, you're on your own." Mara stepped back, suspicious. "Why would you help me?" "Because watching people die stupid bothers me more than sharing my range." He picked up the log she'd been struggling with and examined it. "This is fir, not pine. Wrong tree entirely. Fir holds too much moisture. You want lodgepole pine, the dead ones, gray and hard. They're lighter, they're dry, and they won't rot." He spent the next hour showing her how to identify the right trees, how to fell them safely with limited tools, and how to trim the branches so the logs would lie flat. His instructions were curt and efficient, delivered without patience but also without cruelty. When she asked questions, he answered them. When she tried something wrong, he corrected her once and then let her figure it out. Lila watched from the cave entrance, her eyes wide and wary. Ben had hidden completely, peeking out only when he thought Rourke wasn't looking. "Your daughter's got sense," Rourke said as they dragged a log back toward the cave. "Doesn't trust strangers. Good." "She's had to grow up fast," Mara said. "Out here, everybody does." He dropped his end of the log and pulled out a piece of charred wood, using it to mark directly on the stone face beside the cave. "This is where your wall needs to go, not across the opening. That's amateur thinking. You build it here, 3 feet in from the entrance. Creates an air pocket that holds heat. Then you build your door frame here, offset so the wind can't blow straight in." Mara studied the marks, trying to commit them to memory. "And the chimney?" "Chimney's the hard part. You need clay to seal it, and you need to angle it right or you'll smoke yourself out." He glanced at her. "There's a clay bank about half a mile east, down by the spring. You'll need to dig it out before the ground freezes solid." "You seem to know a lot about this cave." Rourke's expression went flat. "I wintered here once, long time ago." He turned away before she could ask anything else. "You got any food, or are you planning to starve along with freezing?" "We have enough. You have maybe 2 weeks of beans and dried meat, and winter lasts 5 months up here." He walked to his pack and pulled out a cloth-wrapped bundle. "Smoked elk. Should last you a month if you ration it, and there's a rabbit run about a 1/4 mile south. I'll show your girl how to set snares." Mara stared at the bundle. "I can't pay you." "Didn't ask you to." He thrust it at her. "Take it or don't. But if those kids die because you're too proud to accept help, that's on you." She took the meat, her throat tight. "Thank you." Rourke just grunted and went back to marking the stone. They worked in silence for another hour, and then he packed up his tools and prepared to leave. "You'll need to start gathering stones for the wall," he said. "Flat ones, about the size of your head. Stack them here, dry. Don't build yet. You need to understand the structure first, or it'll collapse and kill somebody." "When will you be back?" The question was out before Mara could stop it. Rourke looked at her, something unreadable in his scarred face. "Didn't say I was coming back." "But you want to survive, you learn to do it yourself. I'm not your husband, and I'm not your savior." He shouldered his pack. "But I'll check in a week. If you're still alive, maybe I'll show you how to build a chimney that won't burn the whole mountain down." He disappeared into the trees before she could respond, moving with the easy silence of someone who'd spent more time with wilderness than people. Lila emerged from the cave, coming to stand beside her mother. "I don't like him." "I don't think we're supposed to like him," Mara said quietly, "but I think he might keep us alive." Over the next week, Mara worked harder than she'd ever worked in her life. She gathered stones from the ridge, hauling them one by one until her arms felt like they'd tear from their sockets. She dug clay from the bank Rourke had mentioned, mixing it with water and dried grass to create a mortar that might hold the wall together. She cut dead lodgepole pine, learning through painful trial and error how to fell a tree without it landing on her head. And she taught Lila everything she learned, because if something happened to her, Lila would have to keep Ben alive. The girl learned fast, her 12-year-old hands growing rough and capable. She mastered the snares Rourke had briefly demonstrated, checking them each morning and returning with rabbits that Mara cleaned and cooked. She learned to identify edible plants, to read weather in the clouds, to conserve their water and make the fire last longer with carefully placed stones. Ben tried to help, but he was 7 and small for his age, and mostly he just tried to stay out of the way. Mara gave him tasks he could handle, gathering kindling, sorting stones by size, keeping the fire fed. At night, he curled against her side and cried quietly for his father, for the house they'd lost, for the life that had been stolen from them. "I want to go home," he whispered one night, his voice breaking. Mara held him tighter. "I know, baby, I know." Why did that man take our house? What did we do wrong? We didn't do anything wrong. Sometimes bad people do bad things, and there's nothing you can do to stop them. She stroked his hair, feeling the weight of every lie she'd ever been told about justice and fairness and the world being a good place. "But we're going to be okay. I promise." "How do you know?" "Because I won't let us be anything else." On the 8th day, Rourke returned. He came in the early morning with frost on his shoulders and another pack of supplies, cornmeal, salt, a chunk of fatback that would keep in the cold. He examined everything Mara had done, his face expressionless, and she found herself holding her breath like a child waiting for a teacher's judgment. "Not bad," he said finally. "You've got an eye for stone selection, and this mortar might actually hold." He crouched beside the wall foundation she'd started laying out. "But you're building too wide. You don't need a palace, you need something small enough to heat with one fire. Cut your dimensions by 1/3. That'll barely leave room for the 3 of us. You want space, or you want to survive the winter? Choose one." He stood and brushed off his hands. "I brought something else." From his pack, he pulled out a bundle of old canvas and a coil of rope. "Oilcloth. You hang this inside the cave behind where the wall will be, it'll cut the wind and hold the heat better. And this," he held up a small iron hook, "is for hanging your pot over the fire. Keeps it stable and lets you control the heat." Mara took the items, studying his face. "You said you weren't coming back." "I lied." He met her gaze steadily. "You asked earlier why I'm helping. Truth is, I know exactly what Silas Crown is." "What do you mean?" Rourke's jaw tightened. 6 years ago, I had a wife and a son. Had a trap line that ran all the way down to the valley, cabin on a creek. Everything a man could want. Then Crown decided he wanted that land for timber rights. His hand drifted to his scarred cheek. "When I wouldn't sell, my cabin burned in the night. My wife and boy were inside. I tried to get them out." The silence that followed was terrible. "They said it was an accident," Rourke continued, his voice flat. "Chimney fire, sparks on the roof. But I found boot prints in the snow that didn't belong to anyone in my family. Found a coal oil can in the brush 50 yards out." He looked directly at her. "Crown killed my family because I wouldn't give him what he wanted, and now he's doing the same thing to you." Mara felt something cold settle in her stomach. "The debt papers are forged. Has to be. Jacob Whitlock was honest as the day is long." Rourke's scarred face hardened. "Crown's been doing this for years. Finds a piece of land he wants, manufactures a debt, forecloses before anyone can challenge it. By the time people figure out they've been robbed, the property's sold and Crown's got legal cover." "Then why doesn't anyone stop him?" "Because he owns the territorial judge, half the lawyers in 3 counties, and enough elected officials to make sure nobody looks too close." Rourke's good eye glinted with something dark. "And because most people don't have the spine to fight back, they just take their loss and move on." "I'm not most people." "No." Something that might have been respect flickered across his face. "No, you're not. Which is why I'm helping. Because if you can prove those papers are forged, if you can make enough noise that Denver sends someone to investigate, you might actually bring him down." Mara looked at the cave, at her children watching from the shadows, at the half-built wall that was supposed to keep them alive through the winter. "I can't fight Crown. I can barely keep us fed." "Then don't fight him yet. Survive first. Get through the winter. Build this place into something real." Rourke pulled out a folded map, spreading it on a flat rock. "But while you're surviving, you gather evidence. Every document you have that proves Jacob didn't borrow money. Every witness who'll testify to his character. Every piece of paper that shows Crown's pattern of theft. Nobody will help me. They're all too afraid." "Not everybody." Rourke tapped a spot on the map. "Mary Catherine Brennan runs the boarding house in town. Lost her husband the same way I lost my family. Convenient fire. Crown got the land. She keeps her head down, but she remembers. And Sarah Chen at the Mercantile. Her father's land got seized last year. There are others too. People who've been hurt but can't fight alone. You're talking about building a case that could take years. I'm talking about survival and justice, in that order. Rourke refolded the map. You live through this winter. You build this wall. You keep those kids alive. And when spring comes, you start asking questions and making people uncomfortable. Because Crown gets away with this because nobody stands up. Be the one who stands up. Mara looked at him, this scarred, damaged man who'd lost everything and chosen isolation over trying again. Why don't you do it? You have just as much reason to want him stopped. Because I'm a ghost. Rourke touched his ruined face. People look at me and see a monster. They cross the street, they lock their doors. They don't trust a word I say. But you? He gestured at her raw hands, her determined face. You're a widow with 2 kids fighting for survival. You're sympathetic. People will listen to you. If I live that long, then we'd better make sure you do. He picked up his pack. I'll be back in 3 days. We'll start on the chimney. And Mara? He paused at the edge of the clearing. Keep the rifle loaded and near the door. Crown's no fool. If he hears you're up here, he might decide to finish what he started. He disappeared into the forest, leaving Mara standing among her stones and half-formed plans, wondering if she'd just found an ally or if she'd made a terrible mistake. That night, Lila helped her mother hang the oilcloth at the back of the cave, creating a smaller space that immediately felt warmer. As they worked, the girl spoke quietly. Mama, that man, Mr. Rourke, can we trust him? Mara secured the last corner of the canvas. I don't know, honey, but right now he's teaching us how to survive. That's worth something. He scares me. He scares me too. Mara pulled her daughter close. But fear isn't always bad. Sometimes it keeps you alive. Over the next 2 weeks, Caleb Rourke taught them how to build a home from nothing. He showed Mara how to select stones that would lock together, creating a wall that could bear weight without mortar. He demonstrated the art of building a chimney that would draw smoke up and out instead of filling the cave with choking fumes. He brought tools he claimed not to need: a proper saw, a level made from a board and water, chisels for shaping stone. And slowly, impossibly, the cave began to transform. The wall rose stone by stone, each one carefully fitted and tested before the next was added. The chimney took shape, a rough column of mortared rock that angled up and out through a gap Rourke had identified in the cave ceiling. They built a door frame from pine logs, and Rourke produced hinges he said he'd salvaged from an abandoned claim somewhere down the mountain. Lila lost her fear of him somewhere around the 3rd day, when he patiently showed her how to set a deadfall trap, and didn't laugh when she flinched at the snap. Ben took longer, but even he eventually crept close enough to watch Rourke work, his young eyes wide with fascination. Why do you notch it like that? Ben asked one afternoon, pointing at the log Rourke was shaping. So it locks with the one next to it. See? Rourke demonstrated, fitting 2 logs together. No gaps for wind to get through. Can I try? Rourke hesitated, then handed the boy a small chisel. Keep your fingers clear of the blade, and go slow. This isn't a race. Mara watched them work together, the scarred trapper and her small son, and felt something loosen in her chest. Jacob had been gone for 6 months, and Ben had been lost without his father's steady presence. Rourke wasn't filling that hole. Nobody could. But he was showing Ben that men could be kind even when they were hard, that strength didn't require cruelty. One evening, as the sun set behind the peaks and painted the snow orange and gold, Rourke sat by the fire with them and shared the stew Mara had made from rabbit and wild onions. You've done good work, he said, looking at the wall that now stood nearly complete. Another week and you will have a real shelter. Thanks to you, Mara said. Thanks to you not giving up. He set down his bowl. Most people would have packed it in by now, gone begging to the church, thrown themselves on Crown's mercy, something. But you're still here, still building. What choice do I have? There's always a choice. You chose to fight instead of surrender. That matters. They sat in silence for a while, watching the fire. Finally, Lila spoke up from where she was mending a tear in Ben's coat. Mr. Rourke, Why do you live alone out here? Lila, Mara started, but Rourke held up a hand. It's fine. He stared into the flames. After my family died, I couldn't stand being around people anymore. Every face I saw reminded me of what I lost. Every conversation felt like pretending everything was fine when nothing was fine. He touched his scars absently. And looking like this doesn't help. People see a monster, so I became one. Easier that way. You're not a monster, Ben said quietly. Rourke looked at the boy, surprise flickering across his ruined features. What makes you say that? Monsters don't build houses. They don't teach people things. They don't bring food when people are hungry. Ben's voice was matter of fact, as if he were explaining something obvious. You're just sad. That's different. The silence that followed was profound. Rourke's throat worked, and for a moment Mara thought he might actually cry. But he just nodded once and turned away. Bedtime, Mara said gently. Come on, both of you. She tucked the children into their bedrolls behind the oilcloth partition, kissed them goodnight, and returned to find Rourke still sitting by the fire. Thank you, she said, settling across from him, for everything you've done. Don't thank me yet. Winter's just getting started, but his voice was softer than usual. Your boy's got a good heart. He had a good father, and he's got a good mother. Rourke met her eyes. Jacob would be proud of you. The words hit harder than she expected, and Mara had to look away. I don't know about that. I'm just trying to keep them alive. That's what pride looks like. Not the fancy house or the successful harvest, the fact that you're still standing when everything says you should fall. He stood and reached for his pack. I need to check my trap line, but I'll be back day after tomorrow. We'll finish the door and seal the chimney. After that, you should be set for the season. And then what? You disappear back into the woods and we never see you again? Rourke paused at the cave entrance. Would that bother you? Yes, Mara said honestly, not just because you've helped us, because I think you need people as much as we need you. I stopped needing people a long time ago. No, you stopped trusting them. There's a difference. She stood and walked to him. You don't have to be alone, Caleb. He flinched at the use of his first name, and she realized it might be the first time anyone had called him that in years. Don't, he said roughly. Don't try to save me. I'm past saving. Nobody's past saving. They're just past giving up. She held his gaze. And you haven't given up, or you wouldn't be here. Rourke stared at her for a long moment, and in his good eyes she saw pain and longing and fear all tangled together. Then he turned and walked into the darkness without another word. Mara stood at the entrance watching him go, wondering if she'd pushed too hard, said too much. But she meant every word. Caleb Rourke had saved her family, and whether he admitted it or not, they might be saving him too. 2 days later, he returned as promised, and they finished the door, a solid pine structure that fit snugly in the frame and could be barred from inside. They sealed the chimney with the last of the clay mortar, and Rourke showed Mara how to build a damper that would control the draft. When it was done, they stood back and surveyed their work. What had been an open cave was now a crude but functional shelter, with walls that would hold out the wind, a chimney that drew cleanly, and a door that could be defended if necessary. It's not pretty, Rourke said. It's beautiful, Mara countered. It's survival. That night, for the first time since they'd fled the valley, Mara let herself believe they might actually make it through the winter. They had shelter, they had food for another month at least, and they had someone who, against all odds, had decided they were worth helping. But 3 days later, everything changed. Mara was outside gathering water from the spring when she heard horses. Multiple horses, moving fast through the forest. She dropped the bucket and ran for the cave, her heart hammering. Lila, get the rifle. Ben, get behind the wall. She reached the entrance just as 4 riders broke through the trees. The lead rider was Deputy Hutchins, but his face was grim and his hand was on his pistol. Behind him rode 3 men Mara didn't recognize, hard-faced men with tied-down guns and the look of people who got paid to hurt others. Mrs. Whitlock, Hutchins called out. Mr. Crown wants a word. Mara grabbed the rifle Lila thrust at her and stepped into the open, the weapon held ready but not quite aimed. Tell Mr. Crown he knows where to find me if he wants to talk. That's not how this works. One of the other men urged his horse forward. He was older, with gray at his temples and eyes like chips of ice. Mr. Crown is prepared to offer you a very reasonable deal. You come back to town, sign over any claim to the Whitlock property, and he'll set you up in a nice house with a monthly stipend. Your children will want for nothing. Except their dignity, Mara said flatly. No.
Ma'am, you're being foolish. You can't survive up here. Winter's coming on hard, and you've got 2 kids to think about. The man's voice turned hard. Mr. Crown's being generous. Don't make him regret it. Is that a threat? It's a fact. He glanced at the cave, taking in the half-built wall, the thin smoke from the chimney. You've got 24 hours to reconsider. After that, Mr. Crown will consider this property abandoned and will take steps to secure it for himself. This isn't his property. This is unclaimed range. Not anymore. Mr. Crown filed a mineral claim on this whole ridge yesterday, legal and proper. The man smiled without warmth. So either you're his guest or you're trespassing. Choose wisely. They wheeled their horses and rode away, leaving Mara standing in the snow with her heart pounding and her mind racing. Behind her, she heard Lila's frightened voice. Mama, what are we going to do? Mara lowered the rifle, her hands shaking. Crown had found them. And now he was going to take this too, just like he'd taken everything else, unless she found a way to stop him. She waited until the children were asleep before she allowed herself to fall apart. Then she sat by the fire with her face in her hands and let the fear come. The bone-deep terror that no matter what she did, Silas Crown would take everything, that all her work and struggle meant nothing against a man who could bend the law to his will. The tears came hard and silent, shaking her whole body. She'd been so sure that distance would be enough, that if she just got far enough away and built something strong enough, Crown couldn't touch them. But he'd found them anyway. He'd turned their sanctuary into another piece on his game board, and now he was offering her the same choice he'd probably offered Caleb 6 years ago. Surrender or be destroyed. I wondered when you'd break. Mara's head snapped up. Caleb stood at the cave entrance, snow dusting his shoulders, his rifle in hand. She hadn't heard him approach, hadn't heard anything over the sound of her own despair. How long have you been there? Her voice was rough. Long enough. He came inside and barred the door behind him, then sat across from her. Hutchins came by my camp 2 hours ago. Warned me that Crown's making a move, thought I should know. Why would he warn you? Because Earl Hutchins is a decent man stuck in an indecent situation. He wears Crown's badge, but he doesn't like what it makes him do. Caleb set down his rifle and pulled out a flask, taking a long drink before offering it to her. Tell me exactly what they said. Mara took the flask and let the whiskey burn down her throat. Then she repeated the conversation word for word, watching Caleb's face harden as she spoke. Mineral claim, he said when she finished. That's his new trick. Can't foreclose on land you don't own, but he can file a mineral claim on public range and suddenly you're squatting on his legal property. He took back the flask. And by the time anyone challenges it, he's got possession and the courts rule in favor of the existing claim holder. So we have to leave. No. Caleb's voice was sharp. We have to fight. Fight with what? I don't have money for lawyers. I don't have proof his claim is fraudulent. And I have 2 children who'll freeze to death if I make the wrong choice. Mara's control cracked. I can't win this, Caleb. He's too powerful. He's powerful because people keep surrendering. Caleb leaned forward, his scarred face intense. You asked me once why I don't fight him. Truth is, I tried. After the fire, I went to every authority I could find, the territorial marshal, the land office, even wrote to the governor. Know what happened? Nothing, because Crown had already bought them off or scared them silent. Then what's the point? The point is I fought alone, one crazy mountain man with a grudge and no proof. He grabbed her hand, forcing her to meet his eyes. But you're not alone, and this time we're going to have proof. What proof? He filed the claim legally. Mineral claims require a survey and a discovery of actual minerals. Did he show you survey papers? A geologist's report? Samples? Caleb's grip tightened. He filed that claim yesterday, Mara. You can't survey a ridge this size in one day, and you sure as hell can't discover minerals worth claiming, which means the filing is fraudulent, and if we can prove it, the whole thing collapses. Mara felt a flicker of something that might have been hope. How do we prove it?
We go to the land office ourselves and look at what he filed. We document what's actually up here. No mining equipment, no test holes, no evidence of mineral discovery. We get witnesses who will testify he couldn't have done the work he claims. Caleb released her hand. And we do it before those 24 hours are up. Because once he takes possession, it gets 10 times harder to fight. That means going to town, leaving the children. No, it means I go to town. You stay here with the rifle and shoot anyone who isn't me. He stood and began checking his gear. I can be there and back by tomorrow night if I push hard. You just need to hold until I return. Caleb, wait. Mara stood too. If Crown knows you're working against him, he'll kill you. You said yourself, I said he killed my family to get what he wanted. You think I care what he does to me? The rawness in his voice stopped her cold. I've been waiting 6 years for a chance to bring him down. You just gave it to me. Not if it costs your life. My life stopped mattering the day I pulled my son's body from the ashes. Caleb's hand went to his scarred face. This is just me walking around pretending I survived. But maybe if I can stop him from doing to you what he did to me, maybe that means something. Mara crossed to him and did something she'd been wanting to do for weeks. She reached up and gently touched his ruined cheek. He flinched, started to pull away, but she held steady. Your life matters, she said quietly. To me, to Lila and Ben. You're not just a ghost, Caleb. You're the reason we're still alive. He stared at her, and she saw his throat work. Mara, come back, she said. Whatever you find, whatever you learn, come back. Promise me. I promise. He left an hour before dawn, moving fast and quiet through the darkness. Mara watched him go and then barred the door, checked the rifle, and settled in to wait. The day crawled by with agonizing slowness. Every sound made her reach for the weapon. Every shadow at the cave entrance sent her heart racing. She kept the children inside, made up a game about building a fort from their blankets, anything to keep them occupied and away from the door. Why can't we go outside? Ben asked for the 10th time. Because it's too cold, baby. We need to stay warm. But I want to check my snares. Later, Mara pulled him close, hating the fear in her own voice. We'll check them later. Lila said nothing, but her eyes tracked her mother's every movement, reading the tension and understanding more than Mara wanted her to. That night, after Ben finally fell asleep, the girl crept close and whispered, Are they coming back? Those men? I don't know, honey. If they do, what will we do? Mara looked at her daughter's serious face and made a decision. Come here. I need to teach you something. She brought Lila to the back of the cave and showed her the loose stone Caleb had helped her identify weeks ago. Behind it was a narrow gap that led to a natural chimney in the rock. Not wide enough for an adult, but plenty wide for a child. If men come and I can't stop them, you take Ben and go through here. It comes out about 50 yards up slope. From there, you run east until you hit Caleb's trap line. You follow the markers. He showed you the marks, remember? You follow them until you find his camp. Mama, I can't leave you. Yes, you can, and you will if it comes to that. Mara gripped her daughter's shoulders. You're 12 years old, and I know that's too young for this. But out here, you don't get to be young. You get to be alive or dead, and I need you to choose alive. Understand? Lila's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. I understand. Good girl. Mara pulled her close. Now let's pray it doesn't come to that. But as the second night fell and Caleb still hadn't returned, Mara began to prepare for the worst. She moved their packs near the escape route. She loaded the rifle and set it by the door where she could reach it instantly. She banked the fire low so it wouldn't silhouette her against the flames. And she waited. They came in the dead hours before dawn, when the darkness was deepest and most people were in their heaviest sleep. Mara heard the horses first, multiple animals trying to move quietly but giving themselves away with the crunch of snow and the jingle of tack. She was at the door instantly, rifle ready, her heart hammering. Behind her, she heard Lila wake and immediately start rousing Ben. How many? Lila whispered. At least 4, maybe more. Mara's hands were steady on the rifle, even though everything inside her was screaming. Get ready to run. The footsteps approached, and then a voice called out. Not Hutchins this time, but the gray-haired man from before. Mrs. Whitlock, your time's up. Mr. Crown is prepared to make one final offer. Open the door and we'll talk like civilized people.
But talk from there, Mara called back. Now that's not very neighborly. We rode all this way in the cold. You rode all this way to threaten a widow and her children. Stay where you are, or I'll put a bullet through this door. She heard muttering, then the sound of men spreading out. They were flanking the entrance, getting into position. Mara's mind raced. The door was solid, but it wouldn't hold against a determined assault. The walls would stop bullets, but there were gaps in the stonework. And if they rushed all at once— Last chance, Mrs. Whitlock. Open up peaceable, or we come in hard. You come in at all and someone dies. Might be me, but I promise you'll lose at least one man first. Mara's voice was steady. Is this worth dying for? Doing Silas Crown's dirty work? We're being paid enough to think it is. A pause. Boys, on my count. The first bullet punched through a gap in the stones and ricocheted off the cave wall. Mara dropped low, covering the space where the children should be. But when she looked back, Lila and Ben were already disappearing through the escape route, Lila dragging her brother and both of them moving fast. Good girl, Mara thought. Now I just have to buy them time. She fired through the door, aiming high and hoping the sound alone would make them think twice. Then she moved to a different position, fired again, moved again. The key was to make them think there were multiple defenders, to slow them down, to make them cautious. More bullets came back, punching through the door and pocking the stone walls. Someone shouted orders and she heard the men moving, coordinating. They were going to rush. She had maybe 30 seconds. Mara grabbed the powder horn and poured a trail from the fire pit to the door. Then she touched a burning stick to it and dove behind the stone wall Caleb had built. The gunpowder flared in a bright line of flame and sparks. Not an explosion, but enough flash and noise to make the men outside curse and stumble back. In that moment of confusion, Mara ran for the escape route. She was halfway through when hands grabbed her ankle. Got her, someone yelled. She's in the back. Mara kicked backward with everything she had, felt her boot connect with something that crunched. The grip released and she scrambled up into the chimney, her shoulders scraping rock, her hands finding purchase on stone worn smooth by ancient water. Below, she heard men piling into the cave. Above, she could see starlight through the opening. She climbed with desperate strength, her muscles screaming, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She pulled herself out onto the slope just as hands reached up through the gap below. She rolled away and came to her feet, looking wildly around for her children. Mama! Lila's voice, thin and frightened, came from the trees 30 yards east. Mara ran, branches whipping her face, snow pulling at her feet. Behind her she heard men shouting, heard them trying to follow through the narrow gap. One of them was small enough. She heard him grunt as he squeezed through, and then there were footsteps pounding after her. She burst into the clearing where Lila and Ben huddled behind a fallen log and grabbed them both. Run! East, like I showed you! They ran together, the children stumbling in the deep snow, Mara half dragging them when they faltered. The man behind them was gaining. She could hear him crashing through the brush, could hear his breathing getting closer. Then a rifle shot cracked through the night, and the footsteps behind them stopped. Mara spun around and saw Caleb Rourke step out of the shadows, his rifle smoking. The man who'd been chasing them was on the ground, clutching his leg and screaming. Get to my camp, Caleb said, his voice deadly calm. 1/2 mile northeast, follow the blazes, go. Caleb, go! Mara grabbed her children and ran, following the trail markers Caleb had shown her weeks ago. Behind them, she heard more shots, heard men shouting, heard Caleb's voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. They found his camp, a lean-to tucked against a rock face, almost invisible unless you knew where to look. Mara pushed the children inside and grabbed the rifle Caleb kept there, then positioned herself where she could see anyone approaching. The shooting went on for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Then silence fell, broken only by the wind in the pines. Mara waited, her finger on the trigger, her whole body shaking with adrenaline and terror. When a figure finally emerged from the trees, she almost fired before recognizing Caleb's silhouette. He was limping, and there was blood on his coat, but he was alive. They're gone, he said, collapsing against the rock. Ran like rabbits once I put 2 of them down. They'll be back, though, probably with the whole damn town. Mara rushed to him. You're hurt. Bullet grazed my ribs.
I've had worse. He grabbed her arm. Listen to me. We don't have much time. I got to the land office and you were right. The mineral claim is fraudulent. No survey, no discovery, just Crown's signature and a clerk who probably got paid to file it without questions. Then we can fight it. Not fast enough. Even with proof, it'll take weeks to get a hearing, and Crown won't wait that long. Caleb pulled a folded paper from his coat. But I found something else. Your husband's original land deed. The clerk had it filed in the wrong section, probably on purpose. This proves Jacob owned that property free and clear, and it's dated 2 years before Crown's supposed promissory note. Mara stared at the paper, her hands shaking. This proves the debt was forged. It proves Crown is a liar. But we need more. We need witnesses. We need his other victims to come forward. We need to make enough noise that the territorial marshal can't ignore it. He met her eyes. And we need to do it publicly, where Crown can't make us disappear quietly. How? There's a federal marshal coming through in 3 days, named Samuel Grant, and he's got a reputation for being honest, one of the few who can't be bought. He's holding court in town to handle land disputes. Caleb's jaw set. We go to that court. We present everything we've got. We make Crown answer for what he's done. He'll kill us before we get there. Probably. Caleb smiled, and it was terrible and fierce. Unless we burn him first. Over the next 2 days, they planned. Caleb knew the territory like he knew his own scars, and he used that knowledge to stay one step ahead of Crown's men. They moved camp 3 times, never sleeping in the same place twice, always leaving false trails and doubling back to confuse pursuit. And while they moved, they gathered evidence and allies. Mary Catherine Brennan, the boarding house owner, met them in secret and brought documents showing how Crown had seized her husband's property after a convenient fire. Sarah Chen from the Mercantile provided records of her father's foreclosure and the forged papers that made it possible. A rancher named Tom Hayes testified that Crown had tried to buy his water rights, and when he refused, his cattle started dying of poison. One by one, the victims came forward. People who'd been too afraid to speak alone, but who found courage in numbers. People who'd lost everything to Silas Crown's greed and wanted justice. He's been doing this for 10 years, Mary Catherine said as they huddled in her kitchen late one night. Taking what he wants, hiding behind legal papers and bought judges. Everybody knows it, but everybody's too scared to say it out loud. Then we say it loud enough that they can't ignore us, Mara said. The night before the marshal's court, Caleb took Mara aside. They were camped in an abandoned line shack, with Lila and Ben sleeping in the corner and a cold wind howling outside. You know this is dangerous, he said quietly. Crown will have men there. If this goes wrong, then I die knowing I fought back. Mara looked at him. You asked me once why I wouldn't just surrender. The truth is, I'd rather die standing than live on my knees. Even if it means your children. My children deserve to see their mother fight for what's right. They deserve to know that some things are worth the risk. She touched his scarred hand. You taught me that. You could have stayed hidden, could have let us freeze or starve or get driven off. But you didn't. You stood up. I stood up because I was tired of being afraid. Then let's finish it together. The day of the marshal's court dawned cold and clear. Mara dressed in her best remaining clothes, braided Lila's hair, and made sure Ben looked presentable. Then they walked into town with Caleb beside them and 6 witnesses trailing behind. The makeshift courtroom was packed. Silas Crown sat at the front with his lawyers, looking confident and prosperous in his fine suit. When he saw Mara walk in, his expression didn't change, but his eyes went cold. Federal Marshal Samuel Grant was a lean man in his 50s with gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. He gavelled the court to order and looked directly at Crown. Mr. Crown, I've heard some disturbing allegations about your business practices. Mrs. Whitlock has petitioned this court to review several property seizures, including her own. Do you wish to make a statement before we hear evidence? Crown stood, all polished charm and wounded dignity. Marshal Grant, I'm a businessman, not a criminal. If Mrs. Whitlock has concerns about the debt her late husband incurred, those are matters for civil court, not federal jurisdiction. The forgery of legal documents is very much federal jurisdiction, Grant said dryly. as is fraud involving territorial land claims. Sit down, Mr. Crown. This is going to take a while. What followed was 3 hours of testimony that laid bare everything Silas Crown had built. Mara presented Jacob's land deed and the forged promissory note showing the date discrepancy. Mary Catherine testified about her husband's death. Sarah Chen brought financial records showing a pattern of fraudulent foreclosures. And Caleb Rourke, his scarred face set and his voice steady, described in detail how his family had burned while Crown's men watched. "You have no proof," Crown's lawyer interjected. "This is all speculation and grief. I have boot prints from the night of the fire that match the tread of boots worn by Crown's foreman. I have a coal oil can that was sold at Crown's Mercantile 2 days before the fire, and I have 3 witnesses who saw men riding away from my property that night." Caleb's good eye fixed on Crown. "You killed my family because I wouldn't sell, and you've been killing people's lives ever since." The courtroom erupted. Marshal Grant banged his gavel, calling for order, but the damage was done. Crown's mask of civility had cracked, and everyone could see the fury underneath. "This is slander," Crown shouted. "I'll sue every person in this room." "You'll do nothing of the sort," Grant said coldly, "because I'm placing you under arrest pending a full territorial investigation. And Mr. Crown," he leaned forward, "I suggest you start thinking about cooperation, because attempted murder carries a rope in this territory." What happened next was chaos. Crown's lawyers protested, his men reached for their guns, and Deputy Hutchins, who'd been standing quietly at the back, drew his pistol and aimed it at Crown's foreman. "Don't," Hutchins said quietly. "It's over." For a moment, everything balanced on a knife's edge. Then Crown's men backed down, and the marshal's deputies moved in to take Crown into custody. As they let him out, Crown locked eyes with Mara. "This isn't finished," he said. "Yes," Mara replied. "It is." But even as she said it, she saw something flicker in Crown's expression, something that made her blood run cold. He wasn't afraid. He was angry. And angry men with power were dangerous even when they were in chains. That night, as they celebrated in Mary Catherine's boarding house, Caleb pulled Mara aside. "He's not done," he said quietly. "Grant arrested him, but Crown still has money and connections. He'll make bail, he'll work the system, and he'll come after everyone who testified."
"Then what do we do?" "We don't give him the chance." Caleb's jaw set. "There's something I didn't tell the marshal, something I've been saving for when I knew it would matter most." "What?" "Evidence that Crown's been filing false mineral claims all over the territory and selling them to investors back east. Fraud on a scale that goes way beyond what we showed today." He pulled out a leather folder. "I've been collecting this for 6 years. Letters, surveys, witness statements, everything needed to prove he's been running a criminal enterprise." "Why didn't you present it today?" "Because if I had, Crown would know I have it. This way, he thinks the worst is over. He'll make bail, he'll start planning his defense, and he won't see me coming." Caleb's scarred face was grim. "Tomorrow, I'm taking this to the territorial governor in Cheyenne. If I can get in front of him, if I can make him see what Crown really is, this ends, permanently." "Let me come with you." "No, you stay here with your children where it's safe. I've lived with this for 6 years. Let me be the one who finishes it." Mara grabbed his arm. "You're not doing this alone. We're partners in this, Caleb. We fight together." He looked at her for a long moment, and she saw something shift in his expression. The ghost starting to look like a man again. "Partners," he said finally. "But your children stay with Mary Catherine. I won't risk them." "Agreed." They left before dawn, riding hard for Cheyenne with Crown's crimes documented in Caleb's saddlebags. Behind them, Lila and Ben were safe with women who'd found their own courage in watching Mara fight. But neither of them saw the rider who peeled away from the shadows and headed back toward town at a gallop, carrying news that would change everything. Silas Crown had made bail, and he was coming for them with everything he had left. They were 20 miles from Cheyenne when the first shot rang out. The bullet whined past Mara's head close enough that she felt the air split, and her horse screamed and reared. Caleb was already moving, yanking his mount sideways and reaching for his rifle in one fluid motion. Off the road, into the trees. They drove their horses into the pine forest as more shots cracked through the cold morning air.
Mar counted at least 3 different weapons, which meant 3 shooters minimum, possibly more. She pulled her horse behind a thick trunk and dropped from the saddle, her own rifle coming up as she searched for targets. "How many?" she called to Caleb, who'd taken cover 30 yards to her left. "At least 4, maybe 6. His voice was tight. "They were waiting for us. Somebody talked." Mara's mind raced. They'd left before dawn, told no one their route, taken back roads specifically to avoid this, which meant either they'd been followed from town or Crown had guessed their destination and sent men to every possible approach to Cheyenne. Another volley of shots tore through the trees, closer this time. These weren't warning shots. These were men trying to kill. "We can't stay here," Caleb said. "They'll flank us. If we run, they'll run us down in the open. Then we don't run. We make them think twice about coming closer." He pulled something from his saddlebag, a stick of dynamite, old and sweating nitroglycerin. "Salvaged this from a mining camp last year. Never thought I'd use it. That thing could blow us up just handling it. Or it could scatter them long enough for us to slip away." He met her eyes across the distance. "Your call, Mara. You're in this as deep as I am." She thought of Lila and Ben back in town. Thought of all the people who'd found courage to testify. Thought of 6 years of Caleb living alone with his grief because no one would stand with him. "Do it." Caleb tied the dynamite to an arrow, using strands from his horse's tail as fuse. Then he struck a match, lit the fuse, and drew his bow in one smooth motion. The arrow arced through the air and landed somewhere in the rocks, where the shooters had taken position. 5 seconds of silence. Then the world exploded. The blast was enormous, sending rock and pine splinters flying. Men screamed, horses bolted, and in the chaos, Mara and Caleb mounted up and drove their horses deeper into the forest, taking a game trail that was barely visible and definitely too narrow for pursuit on horseback. Behind them, she heard shouting and confusion, but no one followed immediately. They'd bought themselves time, but not much. They rode hard for an hour, pushing the horses as fast as they dared on treacherous ground. When they finally stopped to rest and listen, the forest was silent, except for the wind. "They'll be tracking us," Caleb said, checking his horse's legs for injury. "And they know where we're headed now. They'll send riders ahead to cut us off." "Then we don't go to Cheyenne, not directly." Mara pulled out the map they'd been following. "Is there another way? Somewhere we can get to the governor without using the main roads?" Caleb studied the map, his finger tracing alternate routes. "There's a fort about 40 miles northeast. Fort Laramie. They've got a telegraph office. We could wire the governor, have him send federal marshals to meet us. 40 miles through country where Crown's men are hunting us. You have a better idea?" Mara didn't. She looked at the folder of documents still secured in Caleb's saddlebag. Everything they needed to bring Crown down, if they could just get it into the right hands. All their evidence, all their witnesses, all their hope bundled in leather and paper. "We split up," she said suddenly. "You take the documents to Fort Laramie. I'll lead them toward Cheyenne. They're looking for both of us. If I give them a target, they'll follow me and leave you clear." "Absolutely not. That's suicide. It's strategy. You're the one who knows this country, who can move fast and quiet. I'm the one they want to silence because I stood up in court." She grabbed his arm. "This evidence is more important than either of us. You have to get it through. And you have to stay alive. Your children will have justice for their father if you succeed. And if I don't make it, at least I made it mean something." She pulled the folder from his saddlebag and pressed it into his hands. "Promise me you'll finish this, no matter what happens to me." Caleb stared at her, and she saw a dozen emotions cross his scarred face: anger, fear, desperation, and something deeper that neither of them had named yet. "I can't lose you too," he said roughly. "Not after—" "You won't. I'm harder to kill than I look." She tried to smile, though her heart was hammering. "Besides, I learned from the best. A ghost taught me how to disappear." He caught her face in his hands, careful of his strength, and for a moment she thought he might kiss her. Instead, he pressed his forehead to hers, his breath warm against her skin. "You come back to me," he whispered. "However long it takes, whatever you have to do, you come back. Understand?" "I understand." They separated at a fork in the trail. Caleb headed northeast toward Fort Laramie,
moving like a shadow through the trees. Mara turned her horse toward Cheyenne and deliberately made herself visible, leaving tracks a child could follow. Within an hour, she heard riders behind her. She led them on a chase through rough country, using every trick Caleb had taught her about moving through wilderness. She crossed streams to break her scent, doubled back through her own trail, laid false signs that sent them in circles. But they were persistent, and they were good, and slowly the net was tightening. By nightfall, she was exhausted and her horse was stumbling. She found a ravine with good cover and decided to make a stand. If they were going to catch her, they'd have to work for it. She built a small fire, just enough to be visible, and settled in to wait. An hour after dark, they came. 6 men, moving carefully through the darkness. She recognized one of them from the courtroom, one of Crown's lawyers, now dressed for killing instead of litigation. They surrounded her position, thinking they had her trapped. "Mrs. Whitlock," the lawyer called out, "Mr. Crown wants those documents. Give them up, and you can walk away from this." "I don't have them," Mara called back. It was even the truth. "Then where are they?" "Somewhere you'll never find them." She heard muttering, then footsteps approaching. The lawyer came into the firelight with his hands visible but a gun at his belt. "Let's be reasonable about this. You're one woman alone in the wilderness. We're 6 men with rifles. You can't win." "Maybe not, but I can make it expensive." Mara raised her rifle. "How many of you want to die for Silas Crown's money?" The lawyer smiled without warmth. "Enough to get the job done." He lunged sideways and the shooting started. Mara fired twice, saw 1 man fall, and then she was running deeper into the ravine. Bullets whined off rocks around her. She fired back blindly, just trying to slow them down, trying to create distance. She scrambled up a slope and found herself at a dead end, a wall of rock too steep to climb. Behind her, she heard them coming. She had maybe 6 shots left and nowhere to run. "This is it," she thought. "At least I gave Caleb time." She turned to face them, her rifle steady despite everything, and prepared to sell her life as dearly as possible. Then the night erupted with gunfire from a completely different direction. The men chasing her scattered as bullets tore through their ranks from the ridge above. Mara threw herself flat, trying to identify the new shooters, and saw the impossible, Deputy Earl Hutchins and 3 other men firing down at Crown's hired guns with brutal efficiency. The fight was over in seconds. 2 of Crown's men were dead, 3 were wounded, and the lawyer was on his knees with his hands up. Hutchins slid down the slope to where Mara was still pressed against the rock, her heart hammering. "You all right, ma'am?" "What? How did you?" "Followed you from town. Figured Crown would try something, and I figured you could use some backup." He helped her to her feet. "Where's Rourke?" "Fort Laramie. Heading for the telegraph office." She grabbed his arm. "You have to protect him. If Crown's men catch him before he sends that wire." "Already thought of that. Sent 2 riders ahead to intercept and escort." Hutchins glanced at the wounded men his people were tying up. "These boys are going to tell us everything they know about Crown's operation. And then we're going to make sure the governor hears every word." Mara felt something inside her finally unclench. "Why are you helping us? You're Crown's deputy." "Was Crown's deputy. As of this morning, I resigned." Hutchins' young face was hard. "I've been watching that man destroy lives for 2 years, telling myself I was just doing my job. But when you stood up in that court and told the truth, I realized I've been doing the wrong job for the wrong man. Time to make that right." He wasn't alone. The other men with him were townspeople, the blacksmith, the telegraph operator, a rancher named Davies. People who'd stayed silent while Crown built his empire on theft and murder, now finally finding courage to act. "We're with you, Mrs. Whitlock," Davies said, "all the way to the end." They rode through the night, pushing hard for Fort Laramie. Hutchins sent riders ahead and behind to watch for ambush, but the country stayed quiet. Either Crown had committed all his men to the chase, or word was spreading that the tide had turned and people were choosing sides. They reached the fort at dawn to find Caleb already there, haggard and bloody, but alive. He'd run into Crown's men 10 miles out and had been fighting a running battle for hours before Hutchins' riders found him. Together they'd fought their way through to the fort's gates. When Caleb saw Mara ride in, he dismounted so fast he nearly fell. She barely got off her horse before he was there, pulling her into his arms and holding on like he'd never let go. "You're alive," he said against her hair.
I thought, when I heard the shooting behind me, I'm fine. Hutchins and his men saved me. She pulled back to look at his face. Did you send the wire? Sent 3. To the governor, to the territorial marshal, and to a newspaper editor in Denver who's been investigating Crown for months. He smiled, tired and fierce. It's done, Mara. The whole territory knows what he is now. The fort's commander, a grizzled captain named Monroe, met them in his office with coffee and grim respect. Your timing's good. We just got a wire back from the governor. He's sending federal marshals and a territorial judge. They'll be here in 2 days, and they want every witness and every piece of evidence you've got. Monroe looked at the blood-stained, exhausted group filling his office. In the meantime, you're under military protection. Anybody tries to get to you, they go through the U.S. Army. Over the next 48 hours, Mara watched their case against Silas Crown transform from a desperate gamble into an avalanche of justice. The newspaper editor arrived with years of investigation into Crown's activities. The territorial attorney general showed up with subpoenas for every land filing Crown had ever made. Witnesses began appearing, people who'd been too afraid to speak before but who found courage when they saw others standing up. And through it all, Mara and Caleb assembled the evidence that would bury Crown forever. The forged promissory notes, the fraudulent mineral claims, the pattern of suspicious fires and convenient foreclosures, witness testimony about threats, about violence, about the systematic corruption that had let one man terrorize an entire region for a decade. This is bigger than I thought, the territorial attorney general admitted as he reviewed the documents. Crown's been running a criminal enterprise across 3 counties. If even half of this holds up, he's looking at 20 years minimum. He's looking at a rope, Caleb said quietly. For murder. My family wasn't the only one he killed. The attorney general nodded slowly. Then we'd better make sure this case is airtight, because men like Crown don't go down easy. The trial was set for 1 week later in Cheyenne, in a courtroom packed with people who'd come to see justice finally catch up with Silas Crown. Mara sat in the front row with Lila and Ben on either side of her, brought from town by Mary Catherine under armed escort. Caleb sat behind her, his presence a steady comfort. Crown was brought in wearing chains, his expensive suit rumpled and his face haggard. But his eyes were still sharp, still calculating, still looking for an angle. When he saw Mara, his expression twisted with pure hatred. The trial lasted 3 days. The prosecution presented a case so overwhelming, so meticulously documented, that even Crown's expensive lawyers couldn't find cracks in it. Witness after witness testified to the pattern of theft, fraud, and violence. Document after document proved the scope of his crimes. And when Caleb Rourke took the stand and described in precise, painful detail how his family had died, there wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom, except Crown's. You took everything from me, Caleb said, his voice steady despite the tears on his scarred face. My wife, my son, my future. You burned them alive because I wouldn't give you what you wanted, and then you tried to do the same thing to this woman and her children. I never touched your family, Crown said coldly. You can't prove. I can prove you ordered it. I have the testimony of the man you paid to set the fire. He's in protective custody right now, and he's going to testify that you gave him $50 and a can of coal oil and told him to make sure nobody got out alive. The courtroom erupted. The judge banged his gavel, calling for order, but the damage was done. Crown's last defense had crumbled, and everyone knew it. The jury deliberated for 2 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood and read the verdict in a voice that carried to every corner of the packed courtroom. On the charge of murder in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of fraud, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of arson, we find the defendant guilty. On all charges, we find the defendant guilty as charged. Crown's face went white. His lawyers immediately began shouting about appeals, about procedural errors, about anything they could think of to delay the inevitable. But the judge, a federal appointee who owed Crown nothing, simply looked at the convicted man with cold eyes. Mr. Crown, you have used your wealth and influence to terrorize this territory for over a decade. You have destroyed families, stolen property, and committed murder to advance your greed. The law has been slow to catch up with you, but it has caught up nonetheless. He paused. For the crime of murder, I sentence you to death by hanging.
Sentence to be carried out 30 days from today. May whatever higher power you believe in have mercy on your soul,
because this court has none. The courtroom erupted again, but this time with cheers. People who'd suffered under Crown's tyranny were finally seeing justice. Mara felt Lila grab her hand on one side and Ben grab the other, and behind her, Caleb's hand came to rest on her shoulder. It's over, he said quietly. It's finally over. But as the marshals led Crown away in chains, he turned and looked directly at Mara. You think you've won, he said, his voice carrying despite the chaos. You think this is finished, but you're wrong. I'll appeal. I'll delay. You'll hang, Mara said, standing to face him. In 30 days, you'll pay for every life you destroyed, and the whole territory will watch. Crown's face twisted with rage, and for a moment she thought he might lunge at her despite his chains. But the marshals hauled him away, and then he was gone. That night, Mara stood outside the courthouse watching snow fall on Cheyenne's muddy streets. People passed by congratulating her, thanking her, telling her she was brave, but all she could think about was how close they'd come to losing everything. Caleb found her there, his coat dusted with snow, his scarred face gentle in the lamplight. You all right? I don't know. I thought I'd feel... I don't know what I thought I'd feel. Relief, maybe. Victory. She looked at him. Mostly, I just feel tired. That's because you've been fighting for months without a break. Your body doesn't know how to stop yet. He stood beside her, their shoulders almost touching. But it's done now. Crown's going to hang, your property's being restored, and the people he hurt are getting their lives back. Thanks to you. If you hadn't helped us, if you hadn't kept that evidence all these years, if you hadn't refused to quit, none of this happens. You started this, Mara. You stood up when everybody else was too scared. Everything else just followed from that. They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching the snow. Finally, Mara spoke again. What happens now? To us, I mean. That depends. Caleb turned to face her. What do you want to happen? It was the question she'd been avoiding for weeks, the one she hadn't let herself think about because there'd been too much else to worry about. But now, with Crown defeated and the future suddenly opening up before her, she couldn't avoid it anymore. I don't want to go back to that valley, she said quietly. Too many memories. Too much grief. That house was Jacob's dream, not mine. And now it just feels like a grave. Then don't go back. Build something new, somewhere that's yours. He hesitated. The cave. We built that together, made it into something real. You could stay there, make it permanent. It's rough country, but it's beautiful. And it's far enough from town that nobody would bother you. Would you be there? The question hung between them, weighted with everything they hadn't said. Do you want me to be? Caleb asked. Mara looked at him. This man who'd been broken and had chosen to help her anyway, who'd risked everything to bring down the person who'd destroyed his family, who'd taught her children and made her laugh and stood beside her when the whole world seemed set against them. Yes, she said, I want you to be. Caleb's breath caught. Mara, I can't be what Jacob was. I'm damaged. I'm scarred inside and out. I've spent 6 years living like an animal in the wilderness. I don't want you to be Jacob. I want you to be Caleb. She took his hand, feeling the calluses and scars, the strength that had built her walls and kept her children safe. I'm not looking for someone to replace what I lost. I'm looking for someone to build something new with. If you're willing. For a long moment, he just stared at her. Then he pulled her close and kissed her, gentle and fierce and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, he was smiling, really smiling, not the bitter twist she'd seen before, but something genuine and warm. I'm willing, he said. I'm very willing. Behind them, someone cleared their throat. They turned to find Earl Hutchins standing there, looking embarrassed but determined. Sorry to interrupt, but there's something you need to know. We got word from the fort. Crown tried to escape tonight, made a run for it when they were transferring him to his cell. Mara's heart sank. Did he get away? No, ma'am. The guard shot him. He's dead. The news should have brought relief, but instead Mara felt a strange emptiness. All that struggle, all that fear, and in the end Crown had died trying to run instead of facing justice. Is it really over then? She asked. It's really over, Hutchins confirmed. His lawyers are already fighting over his estate, but all the fraudulent land claims are being reversed. Your property, Mrs. Whitlock, is being restored to you. And Mr. Rourke, the Territorial Attorney General wanted me to tell you that your family's land is being returned as well. The timber rights Crown claimed have been voided. Caleb closed his eyes, and Mara saw his shoulders shake. She squeezed his hand, holding on while he processed 6 years of grief, finally finding resolution. Thank you, he managed. Thank you for telling me. Hutchins nodded and left them alone. Mara turned back to Caleb and found tears streaming down his scarred face. They get their land back, he whispered. My wife and my boy. They get their land back. It's not justice, but it's something. It's acknowledgement that what happened to them mattered. It mattered, Mara said firmly, and because of you, Crown can never hurt anyone else. That's justice too. They stood together in the falling snow, two people who'd lost everything and fought their way back to something like hope. Around them, Cheyenne settled into night, but for the first time in months, Mara wasn't afraid of what morning would bring. She had her children, she had her freedom, she had a future that was hers to build however she wanted, and she had Caleb Rourke, who'd been a ghost and was learning to be a man again. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. Spring came to the mountains slowly that year, creeping up through the valleys in patches of green and the sound of running water. Mara stood at the entrance of what had been a cave and was now something closer to a home, watching the snowmelt create temporary streams down the rocky slopes. Behind her, she could hear Caleb working on the new room they were adding, a proper bedroom for the children, built with milled lumber they'd hauled up from town instead of rough-cut logs. The sound of his hammer was steady and sure, a rhythm that had become as familiar as her own heartbeat over the past 4 months. Mama, look! Ben came running up the slope, his face flushed with excitement. In his hands, he held something small and brown. A rabbit! I caught it in my snare all by myself. Mara examined the rabbit, then her son's proud face. At 8 years old, he was learning to be self-sufficient in ways that would have been impossible in the valley. But up here, surrounded by wilderness and the patient teaching of a man who knew how to survive, he was thriving. That's good work, baby. Go show Caleb, then we'll clean it for supper. Ben ran off shouting for Caleb, and Mara smiled. The fear that had lived in her son's eyes for months after they'd fled their home was finally fading, replaced by the confidence of a child who knew he was safe and loved. Lila emerged from the cave carrying a basket of washing, her hair tied back in a practical braid. At 13, she was caught between childhood and something else. Old enough to understand everything they'd been through, young enough to still need her mother's reassurance. I'm going down to the stream, she said. Sarah Chen's meeting me there. She wants to show me how to dye fabric with plant roots. Be back before dark, and take the rifle. Mama, it's just Sarah. Take it anyway. Habit keeps you alive. Lila rolled her eyes but grabbed the rifle, slinging it across her back with practiced ease. She'd become a crack shot over the winter, spending hours with Caleb learning to read wind and distance. Mara suspected her daughter had a better eye than she did now. After Lila disappeared down the trail, Mara went inside to where their winter supplies were still stacked against the back wall. They'd made it through 5 months on what they'd gathered and what Caleb had provided, but it had been close. There'd been weeks when they'd eaten nothing but beans and jerky, when the cold had been so fierce that even their improved shelter barely kept them warm. But they'd survived. And now, with spring opening up the passes and the legal battles finally settled, they had choices again. The valley property had been fully restored to her 2 months ago. The territorial court had voided Crown's fraudulent claim and awarded her damages from his seized estate. Enough money to rebuild the house, buy new stock, hire help if she wanted it. She could go back to the life she'd known, pick up where Jacob had left off, give her children the stability of a proper town nearby and a farm that could support them. She'd gone down to look at it 3 weeks ago, standing in front of the house that Crown had never actually occupied. Someone had broken in and stolen what they could carry, but the structure was sound. The fields were overgrown but salvageable. Everything she needed to start over was right there, waiting. And she'd felt absolutely nothing. That house belonged to a woman who'd died the day Deputy Hutchins nailed that foreclosure notice to her door. The woman who'd walked away into the mountains with her children had become someone else, Someone harder, more capable, less willing to accept what the world told her she should want. "You're thinking loud again." Mara turned to find Caleb leaning in the doorway, wiping sawdust from his hands. 4 months of regular meals and sleeping indoors had filled out his frame, and while the scars would never fade, he carried them differently now, not as a punishment, but as proof of survival. "Just wondering what comes next," she said. "I thought we'd decided. We stay here, we build something permanent, we live our lives." He crossed to her, his movements still careful, as if he expected her to bolt. "Unless you've changed your mind." "No, but I keep thinking about that valley property. All that land just sitting there empty." "So sell it. Take the money and use it to build whatever you want up here." Mara shook her head. "That feels wrong, like I'm profiting from Jacob's death." Caleb took her hands, studying her face with his good eye. "Jacob died because Silas Crown was greedy and cruel. That land is yours by right, and what you do with it honors his memory however you choose. If you want to keep it, keep it. If you want to sell it, sell it. If you want to burn it to the ground and salt the earth, that's your choice too." "What would you do?" "I'd turn it into something that helps people. Maybe a way station for folks traveling through. Maybe lease it to a family that needs land but can't afford their own. Maybe something else entirely." He squeezed her hands. "The point is, it's yours. Don't let anyone, including me, tell you what it should be." Before Mara could respond, they heard horses approaching. Both of them tensed automatically, hands moving toward weapons that were always within reach. But then, Mary Catherine Brennan's voice called out, "Hello, the house! We come bearing food and gossip." Mara and Caleb exchanged glances, then went outside to find a small caravan. Mary Catherine and Sarah Chen, plus Tom Hayes, the rancher, and his wife Margaret, all loaded down with supplies. "What's all this?" Mara asked as they began unloading. "Consider it a housewarming gift," Mary Catherine said, handing over a crate of preserves. "We figured you've been up here alone all winter, and spring means company whether you want it or not." "We also brought news," Tom Hayes added. "The territorial governor is coming through next month. He wants to meet you and Caleb personally. Thank you for your role in bringing down Crown's operation." "We didn't do it for thanks," Caleb said quietly. "Nevertheless, you're heroes to a lot of people. Crown had his hooks in half the territory, and you two pulled them out." Hayes glanced around at the improvements they'd made to the cave. "This is impressive work. You planning to stay permanently?" "That's the idea," Mara said. "Then you'll need to file a proper homestead claim. This is still public land, and eventually someone's going to notice you're here." He pulled out a folded document. "I took the liberty of drawing up the paperwork. You file this, prove up the claim by making improvements, and in 5 years this place is legally yours." Mara took the paper, studying the legal language that had once been used to steal from her. Now it was being offered as protection, as legitimacy. The irony wasn't lost on her. "What about water rights, mineral claims? How do I know someone else won't do what Crown did?" "You can't know for certain, but the Territorial Land Office is under new management. Honest people who actually check the filings now. And there's a new law being proposed that would require in-person surveys for all mineral claims. It's not perfect, but it's better than it was." Hayes smiled. "Plus you've got friends now. Lots of them. Anyone tries to push you off this land, they'll answer to half the county." As the afternoon wore on, more people arrived. Earl Hutchins rode up with news that he'd been appointed the new sheriff, replacing Crown's bought and paid-for predecessor. The newspaper editor from Denver showed up with a request to interview Mara and Caleb for a story about fighting corruption. Even Deputy Marshal Grant sent a letter commending their courage. By evening, what had started as a quiet spring day had turned into an impromptu celebration. Someone produced a fiddle, someone else brought whiskey, and suddenly there were 24 people gathered around a bonfire outside the cave, talking and laughing and celebrating not just Crown's downfall, but their own survival. Mara found herself sitting with the other women, listening to their stories. Mary Catherine talked about rebuilding her boarding house and how business was booming now that people weren't afraid to travel through town. Sarah Chen described her father's plans to expand the mercantile. Margaret Hayes shared that she was expecting their 4th child and wanted Mara to help with the birth when the time came. "You've become the person people turn to," Mary Catherine said quietly. "You know that, right?" When someone has a problem, when they're facing something that seems impossible, they think of you and what you survived. You give people hope. I just did what I had to do to keep my children alive, Mara protested. Exactly. And that's more than most people manage when things get hard. Mary Catherine squeezed her hand. Don't diminish it. What you did mattered. Across the fire, Mara could see Caleb talking with the men. He was still awkward in groups, still more comfortable in the wilderness than civilization, but he was trying. She watched Tom Hayes clap him on the shoulder, watched Earl Hutchins share some joke that made Caleb's scarred face crack into a genuine smile. He was healing. Slowly, painfully, but healing nonetheless. The ghost was becoming a man again, and it was beautiful to witness. Later, after everyone had left and the children were asleep, Mara and Caleb sat by the dying fire and watched the stars. This feels like a dream, Mara said softly. 4 months ago, we were fighting for our lives. Now we're hosting parties. Life comes at you fast out here, Caleb poked at the coals with a stick. But Mara, we need to talk about something. Her stomach clenched. What? Your property in the valley. I've been thinking about what you said, about it feeling wrong to profit from Jacob's death. He turned to face her. What if we didn't profit? What if we used it to help people the way we were helped? I'm not sure I understand. There are families all over this territory who got pushed off their land by Crown or people like him. Families with nowhere to go, no way to start over. What if we offered them a chance? Caleb's voice grew more animated. We could divide your land into smaller plots, say 5 or 6 homesteads. We help families get established, give them a year to get on their feet, then they buy the land from you at a fair price. No interest, no tricks, just honest dealing. Mara stared at him, the idea taking root. We'd be giving people what we almost lost, a chance to build something that's theirs. Exactly. And it transforms that property from a reminder of grief into something that creates futures, dozens of futures, if we do it right. He reached for her hand. Jacob was a good man who wanted to build something meaningful. This would honor that. It would also require a lot of work, finding the right families, helping them get started, managing the legal complications. We've faced worse. And we wouldn't be alone. Mary Catherine would help. Hayes knows farming. Sarah's father understands business. We'd build it together the way we built this. He gestured at their home, at everything they'd created from nothing. Mara thought about it, turning the idea over in her mind. The valley property had always felt like an anchor around her neck, a piece of the past she couldn't quite let go. But this transformed it into something forward-looking, something that served others instead of just her. We'd need rules, she said slowly. Requirements to make sure people actually work the land, don't just take advantage and disappear. And we'd need to be careful about who we choose, families that really need help, not opportunists. Agreed. We could model it on the Homestead Act, but make it fairer, more supportive. Caleb was grinning now, excited in a way she rarely saw. This could be big, Mara. Not just for us, but for the whole territory. Proof that there's another way to do things. They talked deep into the night, planning and dreaming and building something new from the ashes of what they'd lost. By the time they finally went to bed, exhausted but energized, they had the bones of a plan that felt right in a way nothing else had since Jacob's death. Over the next 3 months, they put that plan into action. Mara traveled to the valley and began meeting with families who'd been displaced by Crown schemes or simply never had a chance to own land. She interviewed them, assessed their needs, and chose 6 families who showed genuine commitment and capability. The Johnsons, a young couple with 3 children who'd been sharecropping and dreaming of their own place. The Wangs, Chinese immigrants who'd been run out of the mining camps and needed somewhere to farm. The Blackwoods, a freed slave family from the South looking to build something in a place where their children could grow up without constant threat. The O'Connells, Irish immigrants with farming experience but no capital. The Ramirez family, who'd lost their land in New Mexico and were starting over. And the Davidsons, a widow with 4 kids who reminded Mara achingly of herself. Each family got 20 acres, help with building materials, and Caleb's expertise in making something from nothing. In return, they committed to working the land, supporting each other, and eventually buying their plots at a price they could actually afford. Mara and Caleb divided their time between the mountain and the valley, helping build houses and barns, teaching survival skills, mediating disputes, and slowly watching a community take shape. It was exhausting work, but it was meaningful in ways that simple survival had never been. "You're creating something that will outlast you," Mary Catherine observed one day as they watched the Johnsons raise the frame of their new barn. "These families, their children, their grandchildren, they'll all be here because you chose to give instead of take." "Caleb's idea," Mara said. "Caleb's idea? Your property, both of your work. Don't split credit when you should be sharing it." Mary Catherine smiled. "Speaking of which, when are you two getting married?" Mara blinked. "We haven't, that's not—" "Oh, please. Everyone with eyes can see how you look at each other. And you're building a life together, raising your children together, sleeping under the same roof. The only thing missing is the paperwork. It feels too soon. Jacob's only been gone a year. And you've lived 3 lifetimes in that year. There's no rule that says you have to grieve on someone else's timeline." Mary Catherine's voice gentled. "Jacob was a good man, and you loved him. But he's gone, and you're alive, and you've found someone who makes you happy. That's not betrayal. That's survival." That night, Mara raised the subject with Caleb as they sat on the porch of the cabin they'd built near the valley homesteads. It served as a base of operations and a place to stay when they weren't at the mountain. "Mary Catherine thinks we should get married," she said without preamble. Caleb nearly dropped his coffee. What?" "She pointed out that we're already living as husband and wife in every way that matters except legally, and she's right." Mara turned to face him. "So I'm asking, do you want to marry me, Caleb Rourke?" He stared at her, his scarred face working through a dozen emotions. "Mara, I don't know if I can be what you need. What if I can't be a good husband? What if I fail you the way I failed?" "Stop." She grabbed his hand. "You didn't fail your first family. Crown murdered them, and you survived. That's not failure. And you won't fail me because we're partners. We face things together, remember? You deserve someone whole, someone who doesn't wake up screaming from nightmares, someone who doesn't have days where he can barely look at people. I deserve someone who understands what I've been through because he's been through it too. Someone who knows that survival isn't pretty, that healing isn't linear, that some scars never fade completely." She cupped his face, feeling the ridged tissue under her palm. "I love you, Caleb, not despite your scars, but including them. They're part of who you are. And who you are is someone I want to spend my life with." His breath shuddered out. "I love you too. So much it terrifies me." "Then marry me scared. We'll figure out the rest as we go." He kissed her then, deep and sure, and when they broke apart, he was smiling through tears. "Yes," he said. "Yes, I'll marry you." They wed in late summer in a meadow between the mountain and the valley, with half the territory in attendance. Lila and Ben stood up with them, both children beaming with happiness for their mother. Earl Hutchins gave Mara away. Mary Catherine cried through the whole ceremony. The 6 homestead families brought food and flowers and their own stories of new beginnings. Mara wore a simple dress that Sarah Chen had helped her make, with wildflowers in her hair. Caleb wore new clothes that actually fit and looked more nervous than he had facing Crown's guns. When the preacher asked if he took Mara as his wife, his voice cracked on the "I do." But when he kissed her, there was nothing uncertain about it. The celebration lasted until dawn, with music and dancing and enough food to feed twice the crowd. At some point, Mara found herself standing apart from the festivities, watching her new husband dance with Lila while Ben showed off his rabbit snares to a group of fascinated children. "This is what winning looks like," a voice said beside her. She turned to find the newspaper editor from Denver, the one who'd helped bring down Crown. He'd been invited as a friend, not a journalist, but his eyes still held that assessing quality. "It feels strange to think of it as winning when so many people lost so much," Mara said. "But they're rebuilding. Those families out there, they have land because you chose to share instead of hoard. The people in town, they're not afraid anymore because you showed them courage was possible. Even Rourke, that man was dead inside a year ago, and now look at him." The editor gestured at Caleb, who was laughing at something Ben had said. "You didn't just survive, Mrs. Rourke. You transformed everything you touched." "It wasn't just me. Caleb, the people who testified, everyone who—" Yes, it was a group effort, but You were the catalyst. You were the one who refused to accept that Crown was untouchable. He pulled out a small notebook. I'm writing a book about corruption in the territorial land system. Your story is going to be the centerpiece, the widow who brought down an empire. I'd rather be known as the woman who built something new than the one who tore something down. Then I'll write both. The destruction and the creation. The fight and the peace that followed. He smiled. Your children will read it someday. Your grandchildren. People you'll never meet will know what you did here. After he walked away, Mara stood alone for a few minutes more, thinking about legacy. Jacob's legacy was the land he'd claimed and the children he'd fathered and the love he'd given her. Crown's legacy was ashes and grief and a warning about what unchecked greed could do. Her own legacy was still being written. But standing here, watching families who'd been given second chances because she'd chosen generosity over bitterness, watching her children thrive under the care of a man who'd learned to love again, watching a community come together to celebrate hope instead of mourn loss, she thought maybe it would be a good one. Caleb found her as the sun was rising, painting the mountains gold and rose. Shouldn't the bride be at her own wedding celebration? I needed a moment. It's been quite a year, quite a life. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, and they stood together watching the dawn. Are you happy, Mara? She thought about the question. Was she happy? She'd lost her husband, her home, her security. She'd been driven into the mountains and nearly died a dozen different ways. She'd fought a war against a powerful man and won, but at costs that still showed in her children's nightmares. But she'd also found strength she hadn't known she possessed. She'd built a home with her own hands. She'd helped others find hope when theirs had failed. And she'd fallen in love again with a man who understood exactly what it meant to survive the unsurvivable. Yes, she said finally. I'm happy. Not in the simple way I was before, but in a way that feels earned. Does that make sense? Perfect sense. He turned her to face him. Thank you for not giving up. On survival, on justice, on me. Thank you for teaching me that giving up was never really an option. They kissed as the sun cleared the peaks, and behind them the celebration continued, full of life and laughter and the sound of a future being built one choice at a time. 6 months later, Mara stood on the ridge above Whitlock Hollow, the name the homesteaders had given the valley community, and surveyed what they'd created. 6 thriving farms, a shared school building where Lila had started teaching the younger children, a community gathering space where people met to solve problems and celebrate successes. The mountain cave had been transformed too. Caleb had built a proper house around it, using the natural shelter as the core and adding rooms that opened to the views. It would never be a mansion, but it was sturdy and warm, and theirs in a way nothing else had ever been. Mama, Mama, come quick! Ben came running up the slope, his 9-year-old legs eating up the distance. Mrs. Davidson's baby is coming. She says she needs you. Mara grabbed her birthing kit, something she'd assembled after helping 3 of the Homestead families welcome new children, and hurried down to the Davidson place. The widow had remarried one of the O'Connell sons, and this would be their first child together, a new beginning for both of them. The birth took most of the night, but just before dawn, a healthy baby girl arrived, screaming her fury at the world. Mara cleaned her up and placed her in her mother's arms, watching the transformation that happened every time. Exhaustion giving way to wonder, pain forgotten in the miracle of new life. What will you name her? Mara asked. Mrs. Davidson looked at her husband, then back at Mara. Hope. We're going to name her Hope, because that's what you gave us when we had none left. Mara walked home as the sun rose, tired but fulfilled in a way that had nothing to do with rest. Caleb was waiting on the porch with coffee, and she sank down beside him with a grateful sigh. Another successful delivery? He asked. A girl. They named her Hope. Of course they did. He handed her the coffee, and they sat in comfortable silence, watching the valley wake up. Smoke began rising from chimneys. Children emerged to do morning chores. The sounds of life and work and community drifted up on the morning air. Do you ever miss it? Mara asked suddenly. The solitude, when it was just you and the wilderness. Caleb considered the question. Sometimes. There's a peace in isolation that you can't find anywhere else, but there's also a death in it. I was dying up here, Mara. Slowly, quietly, but dying all the same. You brought me back to life. We brought each other back. Yes, we did. He stood and offered her his hand. Come on. Lila's making breakfast, and if we don't get there soon, Ben will eat everything. They walked inside together, into the home they'd built from nothing, into the life they'd fought so hard to claim. Behind them, the sun continued its rise over Whitlock Hollow, lighting up a landscape transformed by the simple revolutionary act of refusing to surrender. Mara Whitlock had walked into the mountains with 2 children and a determination to survive. She'd found an ally in a broken man, faced down corruption and violence, and emerged not just alive but victorious. She'd taken land that had been stolen and turned it into a gift for others. She'd transformed a cave into a home and a ghost into a husband. And in doing so, she'd proved that sometimes the strongest act of rebellion is simply refusing to be destroyed. Sometimes justice comes not from courts and laws, but from ordinary people who decide that enough is enough. Sometimes the best revenge is building something so beautiful, so meaningful, so full of life, that it stands as a permanent rebuke to those who tried to tear you down. Crown was dead and forgotten, his empire scattered to the winds. But Mara and Caleb were alive, and the families they'd helped were thriving, and the children they were raising would grow up knowing that courage and community could overcome any darkness. It wasn't the life Mara had planned. It was better. It was earned. It was theirs. And as she sat down to breakfast with her family, her children, her husband, the life she'd built from ashes and determination, she knew with absolute certainty that she would never take it for granted, never stop fighting for it, never forget what it cost to claim. She'd survived. She'd fought. She'd won. And she would never, ever surrender again.